Another one for World War III watch. And also, I guess on a positive side here, when you've got an ancient ghoul like Leon Panetta telling the truth about Israel, time's up. Time's up. Game's over. So he just straight out, he didn't use the word war crimes, but he's describing them. Let's see what he said.
You have to be able to verify, to take time to make sure that the information that you're getting is accurate with regards to targets. And I have to tell you that in the past, at least in my experience, the Israelis usually fire and then ask questions.
Wow. I mean, that's quite an indictment, is it not? I mean, when you're looking at the death toll here, where there are more than 13,000 children killed, it strikes me it's a fair question to ask whether it is an intelligence issue or even a rules of engagement issue, but just a care issue, right? That de-emphasizing civilian casualties.
There's no question. I mean, look, the IDF has done a quick investigation here. It's not surprising that they've said there are serious violations here. Serious and multiple mistakes were made that led to this disaster. And the real question is going to be, what are you going to do to change the procedures for going after targets to make sure that they're verified and that you have accurate intelligence on those targets? That's a heavy lift, but it's going to be required. I mean, the United States, frankly, having gone after targets, particularly with Al-Qaeda, there were moments where, we were getting intelligence that somebody was there, but we also had intelligence that there was collateral damage. And we said, no, do not fire if that collateral damage is going to happen. So they have to have, some of the same procedures.
Okay. All right. So on the one hand, this reptile admits the crimes of Israel. But then old habits die hard. He claims that the United States, under his watch, was very, very concerned about collateral damage. If there was going to be collateral damage, we called it off and boom. Oh, Obama-led drone strikes kill innocents 90% of the time. Some of you might remember that. We had a 90% civilian casualty rate on Obama's drone strikes. That does not sound like a country that calls it off when there's going to be collateral damage. So certainly we've done our own share of shooting first and asking questions later. But it does tell you something about Israel's standing that someone like Leah Panetta would go on CNN and say something like that. Heaton?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of evolution in public opinion and in media coverage usually takes years and usually takes at least one political cycle to sort of fully take shape. Whereas now what you have is a narrative around this war that has just completely collapsed in 6 months. Yesterday was the 7th of April. That was the 6-month anniversary of October 7th. And I think there needs to be reconciliation for all the people who were canceled for speaking out on this at the time. Obviously, that is a small price to pay compared to the ultimate price that the people in Gaza and in the West Bank, who have been brutalized as a result of this as well, have suffered. But there has to be some sort of reconciliation for that, because you had students get their job letters rescinded over protests. You had people censored off of social media. You had people with their livelihoods taken from them over being right about this issue from day one. And this is obviously not unique to this issue. That happened around the pandemic, where people got canceled for speaking out early, who ended up being right in the end. It happened around January 6th.
It always happens.
after every major event, there's always a massive censorship wave where the first people out of the gate to actually tell the truth about it get muzzled. And then years later, or sometimes months later, in this case, 4 or 5 months later, right? Now, 6 months later, CNN is actually talking about this. Morning Joe is bashing Israel now. But it always takes a certain period of time before everyone is allowed to speak freely about this. So there needs to be some sort of reconciliation here. So for everybody who got censored or canceled or got fired, they should have some recourse, because this was obvious from day one. I mean, this was just the most obvious thing in the world, right? COVID was different. It's microbiology. Who really knows, right? And in the early days, right? Fog of war. Even Ukraine is a bit more complicated. This is as easy as could be. This is as cut and dry as could possibly fucking be. And so the idea that people, lost jobs over this, lost livelihoods over this, lost the right to express themselves over this, that has to be rectified in some way.
The only way that will be rectified is if the entire dynamic flips to the point that the people who took those actions have to fear for their jobs. Because otherwise, Zionists are Zionists or Zionists. They're not going to change their mind. They're not going to change their mind. They could open gas chambers in Gaza, and these people would still be Zionists. You're not going to get them to come off that. I will say, as this evolves, I'm starting to see some Zionists saying, yes, if they're starving children, that is a war crime on both sides, because don't you know Hamas is doing it too, right? No evidence for that other than Israeli claims of that. And then, they live in, we did that segment on Bill Ackman talking about, New Gaza, his vision for New Gaza, which would basically be Hudson Yards on the Mediterranean. And these people are living in a fantasy world, that Israel is going to be able to just like rejoin the family of nations after this, that it's not going to be a pariah state, that it's not going to face massive trade sanctions and ending of diplomatic relations around the world, that it's not going to be completely ostracized. It's interesting. Like you can see that a lot of the rabid Zionists are feeling like they have to give a little ground here. But as Caitlin Johnston's article pointed out, don't let them get away with blaming Netanyahu for everything. Netanyahu is not an aberration. He is a natural outgrowth of the basic premises of the Zionist political project. It has always been a settler colonial project. They went in the Nakba, drove 750,000 people out of their homes, some of whom are still alive and still have the keys to those houses. Netanyahu, if you're going to keep saying Israel is a democracy, well, then Israel is responsible for Netanyahu, isn't it? And he's not an aberration. He didn't just get in. He's been around for 20 years. So what does that say about Israeli society, that somebody like that has been elevated as his leader? Any way that you look at it, Israel cannot be separated from these crimes.
Right. And, like what that article also said is not only are they going to try to blame this on Netanyahu, but they're going to try and make it sound like this was not predictable from jump, which of course it was. And so there was never any plausible excuse, and I'm not saying that previous excuses for censorship have been valid. I'm anti-censorship in all cases, but in this case, it was especially obvious to see what was going on in real time and why, because the truth of what was happening was completely obvious to everyone, not with a sophisticated knowledge of the topic, the most cursory knowledge of the topic.
Hey, there's still tickets available in Stockholm, Oslo, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, El Paso, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, Edmonton, Alberta, Vancouver, British Columbia, Denver, Ashland, Virginia, and Athens, Georgia. See you there.